Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Beyond the Films podcast. We haven't done an episode in a little while. We've had some scheduling conflicts, I guess you could say, just as things go in the summer. So, kind of after our theme week, we had a little bit of a break from podcast just to kind of enjoy our time off and take some time to kind of schedule things in the future. But we're back nonetheless, and today we have a really exciting episode. We're going to be talking about another famous director's filmography. We did our first episode ever for our podcast was Alfred Hitchcock filmography. We're on our fifth episode, and we're doing Stanley Kubrick today, which I'm super excited to be talking about because we both are huge fans of his work.
Yeah, we love Stanley Kubrick. He has made some iconic films, and we're going to
Mm-hmm.
talk about all of those today.
Yeah, we have. We actually watched the first Stanley Kubrick film I ever watched. Actually, was with you. We did like a Zoom, a somewhat Netflix party on Zoom,
Oh, right,
and
right,
we
right.
watched A Clockwork Orange.
Yes.
We watched it really late at night as well, so I think we were kind of half. I think the experience of like the whole, I guess, tone of it all was kind of amplified just because it was so late at night.
Yeah.
But I think that was such a cool introduction to his whole filmmaking style.
hmm
And then obviously I went on a tangent, I guess, afterwards with a bunch of other of his films. But they're all just so innovative and fresh, and they have such a unique kind of transitional element, I guess you could say, that's carried throughout his filmography, which I think is really amazing.
Yeah, so we are going to be talking about, everything from his personal life and, his techniques, his, film accolades, and also at the end we're going to be touching on some controversies um, that happened in his life.
Yes, so this is very similarly structured to the Alfred Hitchcock episode, and I think in the future, every so often we are going to have one of these episodes because they're nice, kind of refresher and break in our podcast. So they're going to be similarly structured in this way as well.
Yes.
But without further ado, I think we can just jump right into it. Yeah, so we're going to start off by talking a little bit about Stanley's personal life and his upbringing, because I think that's very important in forming who he was as a person in his adult life and as a filmmaker. So Stanley Kubrick was born on July 26th, 1928 in New York, and he was raised with his two parents and a younger sister in the West Bronx. His father was a physician, and for their neighborhood, their family was actually considered to be decently wealthy, again, for the neighborhood they lived in. As a child, Kubrick's main love was actually literature, and he would constantly read stories of Greek and Roman mythology, as well as old Grimm's Brothers fables. They're really old classic fairy tales, not the kind of nice Disney ones that were adapted of them afterwards. He would read the real hard stuff. He also was very much interested in watching Yankees baseball, being a New Yorker. He also was really interested in playing chess, which I learned about. He ended up becoming a member of the United States Chess Federation afterwards, and he actually credits chess for teaching him patience and discipline within his filmmaking, which is a very cool fun fact. Um, Another fun fact, actually, Stanley also admitted that if he wasn't a director, he would have either wanted to become a drummer, a baseball player, or a writer. Which I think, I don't know about the drummer or the baseball player, but I mean, we've seen his screenwriting skills come to life on the big screen, and I think he could have made an amazing writer as well. Although Stanley did have an above average IQ, he never actually displayed a keen interest in his academics. He missed many school classes, he received mainly average marks in his academic subjects, and he was mainly considered to be an introverted, shy, and actually underachieving student in his studies.
So at the age of 13, he took up a love for photography when his father bought him a camera, and his fascination with it drew him to become his school's official photographer, and eventually becoming an apprentice photographer for Look magazine after selling them a photographic series he put together. So his interest in photography ranged from him photographing people and places around New York. He also covered a Barnum Circus show in Florida, and he even started shooting boxing matches and also famous jazz singers. So he would use all his work and compile photographic essays to publish in, the magazines he was working for. So Kubrick actually married his high school sweetheart in 1948. He would go on to marry two more times after that. And
Clearly didn't work out very well.
yeah, clearly it did not. And by 1951, he had discovered his greatest passion yet, filmmaking. So he began by frequently attending film screenings at the Museum of Modern Art and various theaters in New York City, and spent hours reading film critiques and theories and taking, various notes on the various films he saw. So eventually, he began making his own short films, feature-length films, and using his extensive knowledge and love for various art forms to give his films a certain personality that drew audiences from all over the world to adore.
Yeah, and I think that's actually something that we obviously touched upon in the beginning is that he had a certain aspect that was reminiscent in every single one of his films
Yeah.
that just drew people in and they were like, I need more, I need, and he was able to kind of meld that into different contexts as well, which we'll talk about in filmmaking techniques. And another thing as well that we mentioned, he was never a academically successful student, I guess, per
Yeah.
his the education system would say.
Hmm.
But he still had such an academic side to filmmaking and that kind of nerdy, like writing reviews and taking notes and being meticulous in all his work rather than just diving deep in, which I think is really interesting because it kind of tells you a little bit about that if you're not good at academics like maths and sciences and the generic things that the education system tells you you have to be good in if you want to be smart, then there's so many other things that you can do and still be successful in. And clearly, it worked out for him in the end because he was able to actually do what he wanted to, and use that hard work and effort into something that would actually pan out for him in the end, which is a lesson to be learned, I think.
Yeah, and also if you like think about it, he basically like self-taught himself all these techniques, and he
Yeah.
used to go put in the effort to see these shows and photograph these different events, and he learned
Mm-hmm.
from all of that.
And he was just a kid when I think we said 15, actually, yeah, 15 or 16 when he first got his job at Look magazine in New York, and he just got picked up one day and he started shooting, and then he started teaching himself how to use his love of photography into filmmaking, and it's a crazy story just to see how he was able to turn his life around in that way and use those opportunities to his advantage. So yeah, again, lesson to be learned for everyone out there.
Yeah.
So now we're going to talk more about his filmography specifically. So we're kind of doing a little, I guess, timeline, you could say, of all his films in the progressive order they are in. So we'll start from his first film. We'll jump over a couple of them, and then some we'll go into more detail about.
Yeah.
So Kubrick's first ever film, was a short film. It was a black and white documentary that was entitled Day of the Fight, and it was about a prominent boxer at the time called Walter Cartier. I'm not a big boxing person, so I've never heard of this person, but clearly Stanley had a love for him and wanted to put him in that movie. So he would then go on to make three other short films afterwards between 1951 and 1953 until he made his first ever feature-length film in 1953, which was an independent military drama called Fear and Desire. And it was noted that in many of his earlier films, he would actually work independent from studios, which was very uncommon in that age. But he was able to kind of gain a full creative control over all these productions because, as we know, if you listen to one of our other episodes about the history of film, we mentioned that during this time in the 50s, there were prominent Hollywood studios, these executive studios that would kind of oversee everything that was coming in and out of the industry, and they really filtered a lot of the kind of creative control and juices that were flowing from these filmmakers. So it was very uncommon to actually be independent, but Stanley wanted to be. And he acted as his own cinematographer, he was editor, he was a sound man on top of his directing role. So he literally put his heart and soul into everything that he did, and obviously into the future what he did as well. The Killing was his 1956 film that was first shot by a professional cast and crew that was hired, and it was actually shot in only 24 days and did have a budget of $330,000. So much different from an independent studio. The film was led by actor Sterling Hayden, who was a well-known actor in the industry. He'd impressed Stanley by his work in the 1950 film alongside Marilyn Monroe called The Asphalt Jungle. Really good film, actually, by the way, for all the classic film lovers out there. And Hayden would go on to comment on Stanley's enigmatic genius in direction. He said, and I quote, "He was very cold and detached, mechanical, but always confident." So again, that kind of weird, quirky personality, not really fitting in with the norms of society, but ended up being such an amazing creator, ingenious person in the creatives. After a few other feature films, Kubrick became known as a young, trailblazing force in the industry after being put at the helm of the very famous movie Spartacus, starring an all-star cast. I mean, Kirk Douglas, Laurence Olivier, Jean Simmons, Charles Laughton. He was so young at the time, and he just was kind of like thrown in to this massive production that people were fighting over to direct and to produce. It also had a budget of $6 million, which actually became the most expensive movie made at the time. I mean, given the cast and given the context, it makes sense. Despite having some major on-set disputes with various crew and cast members, including Kirk Douglas, which was actually a very famous mini feud, I guess you could say, on the set, that if you want to look into, you can as well. The film would go on to garner 6 Oscar nominations and 4 wins, proving that Kubrick was a major force to be reckoned with, even at such a young age. His genius and his natural-born talent for filmmaking just shone through immediately.
Yeah, so Stanley Kubrick was also very close friends with producer and Juilliard alum James B. Harris, who, along with producing Paths of Glory and The Killing, also produced his next biggest film, Lolita. This was also the first one of the first Kubrick films to generate a controversy over some of its very erotic and risky themes, which forced the director to comply with censorship demands and the removal of certain extreme scenes. So, although Lolita wasn't too much of a commercial success to begin with, it has since become another highly acclaimed work of Kubrick's by critics, specifically highlighting its beautiful balance of comedic and dramatic elements, as well as the very keen and insightful directorial view on the social changes of America during the Cold War. Sorry.
I think we can both very much agree with that kind of commentary. It's a beautifully done film.
Yeah, but back then, when it first came out, it was, it had a lot of controversy, but now people appreciate it more.
And obviously we know that Stanley Kubrick is no stranger to controversy in his films.
Yeah.
He was an innovator. You can't, I guess in that aspect you can't blame him. He was really trying to use those themes to his advantage, but it wasn't what normally people would see in theaters, and so obviously if it's not something people are normalized to, they get scared. And he was unfortunately forced to kind of censor a lot of things and remove some things that he put in his work. But I don't know if that could be said today, if that the same thing would happen today, but I think that it was all in the end well worth it because he was still able to do what he wanted in some aspects.
Yeah. But that did not stop him because Kubrick continued on his exploration of satirical dark comedies with the creation of Dr. Strangelove, or How I Learned to Stop Worrying, and Love the Bomb in 1964.
And I remember you telling me actually a story about how your film teacher, I think it was, really did not like Doctor Strangelove for some
Yeah,
reason.
I don't really remember why, but they just I don't know, they just didn't like it.
I loved it. I watched it, and I really liked. I obviously can see how some parts were, you know, kind of on borderline racist or
Yeah,
borderline stereotypical.
that's why my teacher didn't like it because they were like, this is so racist.
But it, in through the lens of art,
Yeah.
we can say I thought it was really nice, and
Yeah.
I thought it was hilarious at most times.
Yeah. So Doctor Strangelove was originally intended to be a more serious political drama. However, due to the fear of the more serious elements not being believable in the story's context, he went for a more comedic approach
Who
with
would
the
have
film.
thought?
Yeah.
Who would have thought? And a political drama would have not. He thought that the serious elements in a drama wouldn't have been believable, so he
Yeah.
decided to go for a comedy. That's like that takes a lot of you know thought and expertise to be able to make that decision. I think.
Yeah. Also, I think like one example that just came to mind is Jojo Rabbit because that was very
Yes.
much the kind of similar.
Mm-hmm. Actually, it's a perfect example. I wouldn't
Yeah.
even have thought of that.
Yeah.
Very much, yeah. I think, and I'm sure there was some inspiration drawn by, or drawn, I should say, sorry, by Taika Waititi in that sense of this film.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
but yeah.
If you guys haven't seen Jojo Rabbit, you guys should watch it.
Oh, you're missing out. That was a fantastic film.
Yeah.
Definitely a highlight of 2019 for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, yeah, so Doctor Strangelove was originally intended to be a more serious film, but he made it more comedic. So Stanley Kubrick was also able to employ what became known as the first important visual effects crew in the world. After getting denied cooperative access to the US military arsenal by Warner Brothers and having to construct all the set pieces and locations himself, which is
Yes.
which is actually so impressive.
It's actually crazy to think about because I was that specific part. I wanted to do a little bit more research into.
Hmm.
He had years of battle with Warner Brothers and with
Yeah.
like companies of trying to actually get access to proper U.S. arsenal
Yeah.
to use in the film, and after tons of debates and I guess like almost like lawsuits or arguments, they decided they were not going to let him have it. And so instead of maybe your average person would be like, how am I going to make this real when green screen and CGI does not exist? Maybe I should think of something else. Nope. Stanley goes, I'm going to make every single thing myself.
Yeah.
Every single thing. And a lot of the pieces in that film, like the when they kind of do the wide shots of planes and they do the kind of interiors of things, like it's a lot to think about that they were doing that, because I think at the time it wasn't like there wasn't too much put into set pieces. Like you use like a kind of elusive background of kind of being like perspective to make it look like there was a huge field in front of you or something like that.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly impressive that he was able to do that.
Yeah. So, in the beginning of the movie's release, it received a lot of mixed reviews, mainly from those claiming it made a mockery of the country's entire defense team and military. So people
They called
were,
it a sick joke.
yeah, people perceived it, and I quote, a sick joke. Um, and
I can see why.
yeah, honestly, because
It's out there.
Yeah.
I'm honestly shocked that at the time it was even allowed to be, like put on the screen.
Yeah, or released.
He really, really pushed it at times.
Yeah, he did. But that goes to show he doesn't really care what other people thinks. He just cares about what he likes.
And again, that I think that it's really what's credited his success over the years. He likes his creative control. He is able to get that no matter what. He does what he thinks is best for the project, not what the studio exec thinks will make the most money or what he thinks audiences really want to see next.
And unfortunately, we don't really have a lot of directors like that today because studios like to have control, but then the films end up being very like
Right. And
not so great.
yeah, and studio control again nowadays is much different than before.
Yeah.
Obviously, studio control before was literally like separate studios, and that every studio would have a roster of different uh, actors and actresses that were contracted by that only their studio. So it's almost like a competition of studios rather than just films. Nowadays, obviously, it's very different because we don't see the studios highlighted or differentiated as much,
But
but
now
it's
it's like
still
also very
filtered.
strict. Yeah.
Yeah, it's still a lot of special effects, CGI, like, give them action, give them this, give them. It's there's always over the generations that same kind of repetition of film. It can be interpreted good, or it can be interpreted as a bad thing, but it just is what it is, I think.
Yeah. So, funnily enough, critics over the years have started to find the genius in his very dark work through this film, and it has been named the 39th greatest American film as well as the third greatest American comedy by the American Film Institute and the sixth best comedy of all time by The Guardian,
There you go.
which is huge.
That's that's third. The American Film Institute is, obviously high class. Like
Yeah,
they know what they're doing for the most
very
part.
yeah, very high class.
Third greatest American comedy of all time. Like, yeah, way to go, Stanley.
Yeah,
It tells you. I mean, you do what you think is right for the project, and you allow that to come through, no matter the cost or the reaction,
hmm,
and it pays off in the end.
yeah,
So, overall, I think the consensus is his story as a filmmaker and his mentality towards it is something that many aspiring filmmakers or people who want to enter the industry should really look more into and kind of understand, because it's really inspiring to see. Yeah, so moving forward, after many successful and magnificent, or however successful and magnificent his previous films were, they were all superseded with production of arguably his best film ever made, dun, da, 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 2001: A Space Odyssey, which I just have to say the name, and every single cinephile in the room would stand up and just start talking about how amazing it is. I think its grandeur as a film on its own, I think you can agree, is just like
yeah.
top notch.
Hmm.
Because it's I don't think you can say 2001: Space Odyssey and not have the word masterpiece either before or after it in a sentence.
Yeah.
It is beautiful. So Kubrick spent almost 5 years just in preparation for the masterpiece, the sci-fi masterpiece, which included collaborating on the screenplay with the author of the original novel. He researched and meticulously laid out what the future of the story would look like visually through set pieces and constructions. And he even got permission from NASA to examine and observe one of their best spacecrafts for accuracy. So he finally, in the end, got something that he wanted from
Yeah.
asking for it. And in pattern with many of his earlier films, it was initially critiqued for its lack of dialogue and slow pacing, which unfortunately some people today still think of. I think if you don't, it's it's a film that you need to have you need to have taste to watch.
Yeah.
I think as harsh as that sounds, because if you're used to the very action, filled, drama filled, CGI filled industry or output of Hollywood today, if you watch a film like that, you're gonna think it's slow paced. You're gonna think it's boring.
Yeah.
But if you think about it in the time, if you think about it in comparison to great film and just in the techniques and variations used, it's a masterpiece again. Yeah, so it was soon ingrained afterwards, even though it was critiqued poorly in the beginning, in film history for changing the science fiction genre in a whole way. It really did. Kubrick was praised for his experimentative use of camera technology. It was new. The Super Panavision 70. His beautiful mesh of this vibrant lighting and colors and patterns, and even its ability to examine the idea of what he called the metaphysical concept of humanity intertwined with the depth of human emotion, I guess you could say, in this really poetic way. It won Stanley his first ever personal Oscar win for visual effects, rightfully so, and is widely considered to be one of the greatest and most influential movies ever made. Even Steven Spielberg called it the big bang of his filmmaking generation. And notable biographer Vincent Labruto credited the film for securing Kubrick's place in history as a master filmmaker and artist. So 2001: A Space Odyssey really basically was like the pinnacle of Stanley Kubrick's success as a genius filmmaker. I mean, if Steven Spielberg is calling it the big bang of his filmmaking generation, that's saying a lot. Steven Spielberg made the first blockbuster. So that's saying, volumes. Then came the very intense, as you mentioned, X-rated film A Clockwork Orange in 1971, starring Malcolm McDowell, which, even with its artistic ingenuity clearly reflected in 4 Academy Award nominations, became one of the most controversial films ever made. It put the controversy of Lolita, like, in the ground, I think you could say.
Yeah, honestly, I really like this film though.
I
I know
loved
it's like
it.
really intense, but like it's really enjoyable.
It's super intense, but I think it's like I guess you could say I feel like it's really classic to Kubrick's style.
Yeah,
Like all the elements that you see him use in his other films, which we'll talk about, like his camera movements, his use of light and vibrant colors, his use of sound and music,
and
like they're all put together properly.
some of his use of like set pieces is very interesting.
Interesting is the word we're gonna use for that. You
Yeah,
can make your
because
own
I
assumption.
don't know what else to use.
Yeah, I mean, it's X-rated for a reason, let's just say. But I am really surprised Malcolm McDowell, and I said this to you as well, he was not nominated for anything.
Oh my god, he honestly
Was
his
he actually?
performance
Let me.
was very intense, and it should have been praised more.
I was shocked when I learned this because he was
He
phenomenal.
went
Like
all
his
out.
performance in that dystopian kind of manner, and I mean, I guess the reason maybe he wasn't nominated was just because of how risque the themes were,
Yeah,
and perhaps the Academy and other film critic associations didn't want to kind of encourage that. I
but
guess you could say,
in my mind he was a
yeah,
winner.
it was like that. Again, his performance is probably better than some of the Academy Award performances today.
Yeah.
He like
He went all
really
out.
he went all out. He really pulled the chops, like pulled out his chops for this one. And it was like the progression in his character and his he you never knew what he was thinking.
Yeah.
I loved that so much. I analyzed the crap out of that guy, and
And
in
yeah.
any given moment I couldn't tell what was happening.
And
You know,
also he like in the first kind of act of the film he actually like scared me. Like this was a dangerous person.
yeah,
I
I'm the first shot where they start going from a medium shot to the wide shot, kind of zooming out on just Malcolm's face drinking the milk, kind of taking that, milk obviously represents innocence, and it's like a Malcolm drinking the milk is kind of ruining the innocence or taking the innocence away from it. But it's just him in the frame,
yeah.
and it's just like it was one time where they did a close up, and I was like, that's all you need. That was one of the perfect frames, just him in the
Yeah.
camera, because you could already tell what was gonna happen, and and then when you saw kind of the surroundings, it kind of only just highlighted him. He was the main focus. It was beautiful. It was very very risque, X-rated for a reason again, but very beautiful.
Also I just have to mention that his character development in that movie was probably better than
Oh my
most of
god.
the character development we get nowadays.
Right. It was an intense storyline, but it was really really well written.
Yeah.
It was like it wasn't I guess like your standard drama, like beautiful of screenplay of, the character goes through something and then he comes out at the end and there's a beautiful revelation with someone and someone's crying and someone's
No.
this.
Yeah.
It was such a wacky concept, but he made it work.
Yeah.
He made everything work, and the dialogue, the language.
Yeah.
We get to have subtitles on. I remember watching that because we were kind of just like, I have no idea what's happening. But it worked. It kind of almost enhanced that level of like the dystopian, the wackiness, the uniqueness of the film.
Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, Clockwork Orange. Again, if you can stomach it, and if you're over 18, please over 18. You can definitely go ahead and check out that film. It is on Prime Video if you would like to watch it. But yeah, it's just amazing. So the New York Film Critics Circle still has named it the best film of that year of 1971, and even William Friedkin, who had won the Best Director at the Oscars that year, he commented in his speech that Stanley was, in his opinion, and I quote, the best American filmmaker of not just that year, but the best. Period. That's what the Best Director of winner of at the Oscars said in his acceptance speech.
Yeah, so
That's
yeah,
crazy.
yeah, so after that he would continue on to adapt and develop more period pieces as well as horror thrillers with films such as Barry Lyndon, The Shining, and Full Metal Jacket. Kubrick's final film, Eyes Wide Shut, released in 1999 and starred the then married couple Tom Cruise and Nicole Kidman in a story of sexual realization. But also, I just want to touch this film actually had a lot of, and still does have a lot of conspiracy theories around it. And
I actually was reading into that a little bit
yeah,
because I did not. I have not watched the film in its entirety. I've watched like clips here and there, but I haven't actually seen the full film. But I have read that. So can you talk about that a little bit more? Because I'm actually interested.
yeah, also, yeah, there was like a lot of conspiracy theories that this actually happens in Hollywood a lot with the, elite people. They host,
Right.
stuff like that. If you have seen the film, you know what I'm talking about. And
Mm-hmm.
it was said that most of the film was actually cut out because they didn't want the audiences to see it because they were trying to hide something, which is also very interesting. But like honestly, I love like conspiracy theories like this. I think that they're so interesting. So when I was reading up on it, it was actually very like it's not unbelievable, to be honest.
It isn't. It's kind of sad to say that, but it's not.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, so that was the whole thing with Eyes Wide Shut. It's still a very relevant film today, and there's still a lot of, theories and conspiracies around it. But that just shows how, people are still talking about it. So, it was actually based on a 1926 Freudian novel entitled Trauma Novelle, and after working tirelessly in secret on the film's screenplay and production, it became his last film ever released. So during this time, the last years of his life, he became a sort of social
recluse.
yeah, recluse, rarely doing interviews or making any public appearances outside his house. And that actually goes with all the conspiracy theories because people think that because he made this very um this film, he was actually being targeted because they no one because people that were higher up in the studios didn't want audiences to see it,
Mm-hmm.
which is
Yeah.
also
So
interesting.
it was. I guess it was an unfortunate last few years. He
Yeah,
was again a social recluse. He worked on his own and had to work in secret on the screenplay.
yeah,
Would only send, I think it was that he would send bits and pieces to the studios, so they would approve bits and pieces, but they never actually saw the full thing until it came out.
yeah,
And yeah, again, I mean, it's unfortunate that he had to have that kind of stress and that he he wasn't able to kind of enjoy the filming of that project as much as he could have
yeah.
in his last years of life, especially considering it was his last project ever.
People assume
Um,
that he knew things that other people didn't, and he wanted to expose the industry.
right, and I'm sure there was so much more he had to say, if not for his tragic passing, but that it is unfortunate.
So he tragically passed away from a heart attack in his sleep on March 7th of 1999, but his legacy in film and influence continues to live in the industry. So his work is said to have influenced powerhouse directors such as Martin Scorsese, Steven Spielberg, George Lucas, James Cameron, Ridley Scott, Wes Anderson, and has specifically been a major source of inspiration in the works by Christopher Nolan, David Fincher, Guillermo del Toro, David Lynch, Tim Burton, and more. He was even praised by his own living filmmaking hero, Orson Welles, and as well as Akira Kurosawa, another admired director of Stanley's, who said Kubrick had made many masterpieces of film.
So I mean, if we name these names today, these are modern day Hollywood directors that are huge and that are creative geniuses in their ways.
Yeah.
And he had such a powerful influence over their work. You know, that again, it speaks volumes as to his influence over film and film history and the generations that would come from it. And I mean, I'm sure it's amazing to even be praised by your own living heroes in that sense.
Yeah.
Akira Kurosawa created tons of amazing works, and so for the fact that he even admitted that many of Stanley's films would be considered masterpieces,
Yeah.
is amazing. I mean, Seven Samurai is like,
Oh, that's one of my favorite films. That's one of
yeah,
my favorites.
any film person is like, that's top 5 of their list automatically. Yeah. Like, it has to be.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it's fantastic. But yeah, so that's his filmmaking timeline. We're going to touch a little bit on his filmmaking techniques they used. So one of Kubrick's most famous shots that he would use would be called the reverse tracking shot, which we touched upon a little bit earlier. It was where the camera would travel backwards for an extended period of time, and they would impart somewhat of like a forced perspective in this film. So, for example, in Clockwork Orange, where the audience is driven directly at Malcolm McDowell as he kind of drinks the milk, and we go back and we kind of see his surroundings, his environment, and it builds on his character, and of course adds a lot of dramatic tension. The Shining is also another really good example of this. He used it to create this really unsettling mood and kind of this chilling atmosphere within the whole film. And the perspectives he uses in the film also feel kind of unnatural, which was a really good example of how unique his filmmaking style was. Like, for example, when he had the Danny on the bike when he was going through the hallways. I remember actually watching it with my dad, and my dad went to me and he said, "Is this normal? Like, has anyone done this?" And I said, "Done what?" And he goes, "Has anyone just filmed someone on a bike just going through a hallway?" And I went, I really don't know. It's not something you would think you want it from the front because you want to see the character's face, but Stanley wanted it to have the perspective of Danny from the back. Even with the scene where Jack Nicholson's in that kind of freezer, where Shelley Duvall's kind of on the outside and they're talking to each other, and we have the camera lit right underneath his face and the shadow of the light on top.
Yeah.
And that would just created such an unsettling kind of look on the character who was growing into that person. It was his camera's angles and the shots were becoming reflective in the characters' personalities as they progressed through the film. So that was very, very interesting and a really good way of using that tracking shot.
Yeah, so another one of his filmmaking techniques included him taking his time with each project. So he was actually known for, you know, he didn't rush into any of his projects. He always took his time. So an example is Eyes Wide Shut, and it holds a Guinness World Record for the longest constant movie shot with 400 days. So you can actually say he was kind of a perfectionist because he wanted each shot to be perfect and the way he wanted it to be.
Right, he was notorious for taking hundreds upon hundreds of takes of a single scene or a single kind of sequence from his actors, and it would obviously be very drooling and grueling in that sense, but it was an ode to his perfectionism and wanting to get exactly what he wanted from the film.
Yeah, so in the movie The Shining, he got 100 takes from the actors. Reference, we're gonna talk about this later on, but the Shelley Duvall controversy. So he there was this one scene. It was where he got like he did it hundreds of times, which is crazy, honestly.
Yeah, it was one scene we'll talk about more. It was, I mean, many different scenes, but this one scene where Shelley is crying going up the stairs. We'll talk a little bit about more later.
Yeah.
It's notorious because he was just on it, on her case, and it again leads to a whole bigger story of what actually happened behind the scenes.
Yeah. So one of Kubrick's many film techniques comes from his relationships with his actors. He empowered his actors to try scenes over and over again in different ways. For example, Malcolm McDowell came up with the idea for the infamous use of Singing in the Rain in A Clockwork Orange.
Yeah, and I think again another amazing strategy as a filmmaker. I actually myself am an actor, so I know that it's amazing when a director lets you have more input into what you think your character would do because you spend so much time on your own character and you know figuring out how you want to deliver your lines and how you want your character to be molded and seen in the film. But when the director says I want to see what you want to do in this, it makes it more of an enjoyable experience and therefore more successful. So when I think that's fantastic. I had no idea that Malcolm McDowell actually came up with the singing in the rain bit in A Clockwork Orange because that part is it's so universal, I think, now to his character. And so that's what happens. You got to find those good strategies to be able to work with crew members and cast members and be successful in that way, which Stanley Kubrick clearly was able to do. And again, on top of his cinematography, taking from his love and experience in the photography industry, he loved distinct varieties of colors and lighting in his cinematography. So either he would use really bold colors that would really stand out, like the neons, the blues, greens, reds, primary colors, of course, or varying contrasts of black and white. So it would kind of be like a different end of the spectrum. He would have that black and white contrast, or would use those bold colors. Overall, his films again they were innovative, they were fresh, they were unique, and they were also extremely aesthetically pleasing in a different way than I think we think of today. I guess visually they were sharp, you know, they were colorful, they were just aesthetically pleasing in that sense, I think. And again, talks of his success. He used innovative techniques like these to make his films stand out.
Yes, so now we are going to briefly go over his accolades. These are just the ones that we thought were most relevant. They're obviously a lot more, but these ones are just the most relevant ones that we thought we would share. Um, so we're gonna actually list this by year, so it's like so we it's more organized. So we are actually going to start with 1964. He won the Bodil Award for Best American Film, Doctor Strangelove. 1965, BAFTA for Best Film, Doctor Strangelove, again. And also in 1965, the BAFTA for Best British Film, also for Doctor Strangelove. And again in 1965, he won the Writers Guild of America Award for Best Written Comedy for Doctor Strangelove. In 1969, he won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, 2001: A Space Odyssey. And in 1971, he won a New York Film Critics Circle Award for Best Film for A Clockwork Orange.
And just before we continue, I just want to go back again and talk about the Academy Award. That was his only personal Academy Award win.
Yeah.
He had won many other Academy Awards for of his films, but that was his only personal Academy Award win. And it's so weird to say that because he was such a powerhouse of a director.
Yeah.
You know, people were complimenting him left and right. He was known as such a trailblazing force in the industry. But you know, is that because of the themes that he used, or whether it be maybe his relationship with Hollywood, or not having the standard Hollywood life, that maybe the Academy didn't want to recognize a lot of his work. Um, but I mean, it also goes to show Academy Awards and Oscars do not make or break your career, or
Yeah.
do not make or break a good film, or a good director, or a good whatever in the industry.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after that little rant, going forward, in 1972, A Clockwork Orange was also awarded the Hugo Award for Best Dramatic Presentation. In 1976, he won another BAFTA Award for Best Direction for Barry Lyndon. In 1987, he won the London Film Critics Circle Award for Best Director of the Year for Full Metal Jacket. In 1997, he won a Golden Lion Lifetime Achievement Award. He also won another Lifetime Achievement Award by the Directors Guild of America in 1998, which is huge. And in 2000, he won a BAFTA Fellowship Award. So he's had accolades left and right,
Yeah.
especially personal ones and lifetime achievements. So that kind of talks about the general kind of commentary he wanted to make on Stanley Kubrick, his life, his filmography, his techniques, his accolades. Now we're going to touch a little bit on a very, very notorious controversy that had happened on the set of The Shining. So Shelley Duvall, who plays a character in The Shining, who plays opposite of Jack Nicholson, she had experienced a very, what she called, verbally abusive environment while filming. She played Wendy Torrance. A lot of the scenes actually we'll talk about, he would really be on her case, really, really hard on her, taking takes multiple times after time, would say things to her maybe to rile up emotion. But today it would be considered a very toxic work environment, or a not very acceptable behavior from a director.
Yeah. Yeah, so the scene we want to touch on is the scene where um Jack Torrance, played by Jack Nicholson, with I don't remember which exactly, but he was actually, it was a very intense scene in the film, one of the more iconic ones, where she was holding the axe and he was coming up the stairs towards her, if you know what I'm
Right,
talking
yes.
about.
Yeah.
And he made her do that so many times, like over and over, where she had to like keep screaming and crying. It was a very intense situation, and she said that it really like affected her mentally.
And it's really considered one of Hollywood's really, really like tragic cases of film, of
Yeah.
an actor, because she was considered a really popular actress in the 70s and 80s, mainly because of Annie Hall,
Yeah.
by Woody Allen. Along with a number of other films, she was known. She had a very distinct physical appearance. She was very beautiful, and she was known for playing those kind of eccentric-esque characters in her
Mhm.
time. But this was something that she really just unfortunately could never get over. I know she commented about it in an interview while, like, right after The Shining, not the Dr. Phil segment she did in 2016. She talked about how she was kind of just getting over in a relationship, and it wasn't, a lot of other things were happening in her personal life, and so this just kind of added on to her anxiety, and that turned into depression. She I don't think she actually acted after that.
Yeah, I don't think she
I think
did
that was
either.
her last prominent film that she did, and we don't really know what's happened to her since. And again, in 2016, she did a she went on the Dr. Phil show to talk about the struggles that she had endured while filming. And she does credit that to be kind of the pinnacle of the downfall that she did have, unfortunately. It's really sad. It really is. And I know that, personally speaking, when I watched the film, I thought the film was great. Shelley's performance at times may not have been like the Academy Award worthy, but in the scenes where she was crying at the end, like the scene where Jack was coming up towards her with the axe, or sorry, was just coming up towards her while she was holding the bat, or even when they were just towards the end where she was just crying and she was just really scared. It looked so real, but because it was real.
Yeah.
And you could see the pain. Like you just there was something about the performance that towards the end where you could just tell that it was real pain. It
Mhm.
wasn't just a performance, and it's like just to put someone through that it's really just terrible. It is. It's unfortunate what's happened to her.
Yeah, so we just wanted to touch on that a little bit because it's one of the biggest controversies.
It's
And
very notorious
yeah,
that what happened, and the various mental issues that she had to deal with afterwards of the abuse that she kind of took, mainly verbal abuse that she took, and so Jack Nicholson has also commented a bit about the environment that they worked in at that time, but and of course his impact was nothing compared to Shelley's impact.
yeah,
So she was going to be big, and then unfortunately the film, it really just took her really down.
yeah,
So yeah, so again, you can make your own. We're not commenting at all about Kubrick's character in that way. Obviously, we can recognize that if what happened did happen, which we with various accounts will say is true, it's really unfortunate. But it's important to mention it because we want all sides of the story and everything that's happened.
yeah. So yeah, that actually concludes our podcast on Stanley Kubrick.
Yeah, so thank you so much for listening. It was another fantastic time researching, learning more about this amazing director and
Yeah,
amazing genius in the creative industry. And we really hope to continue doing more of these director filmography analysis type commentaries because they're fun for us and we get to learn more, and hopefully you get a little bit more insight into some of your favorite movies and favorite directors. So let us know what else you would like to see from us in our upcoming episodes. We're going to continue back on our schedule of every other week posting on Tuesdays, and we'll be updating regularly our film account on Instagram at Beyond the Film. So make sure you stay tuned for that. And another very big announcement about an event, if you want to talk about that, that's coming up August 22nd.
yeah. So this film podcast should be up before the event. So on August 22nd, which is Saturday, this Saturday actually coming up, is an event called DC Fandom. And so this is supposed to be a huge event for not only DC fans but comic book fans, and it's supposed to be like DC's version of Comic Con. So it's specifically DC content. There's going to be a lot of surprises and reveals. A lot of directors and cast members of the upcoming films are going to be there, and it's going to be
Mm-hmm.
a 24-hour event starting at 1 p.m. And we're going to be live on the account all day updating. So stay tuned for that.
Yeah, it's going to be really exciting. We're going to be constantly on on the account, making sure you guys get the latest updates if you're not able to attend
Yeah,
the event online.
yeah,
So
definitely.
it's going to be really really fun for us as well.
Yeah,
So yeah,
so we're very excited, and we're excited to also share this episode 5 with you guys because it's been a while.
yeah, we're back, and hopefully we will continue to put out some amazing podcasts for you guys. So thank you very much for listening, and we will see you soon. Bye.
Bye.